Welcome back. Today we're going to talk about 5 controversial travel rules. These are rules people say you should follow on travel day that, well, some of us don't. And I'll tell you what I do, and if I don't follow them, why. But let's get started. First thing we're going to talk about is using those propane refrigerators while driving down the road. I love the propane refrigerators. They're super efficient. If you boondock, they're far more efficient than having a residential running off your inverter or running off your 12-volt batteries. And we can talk about that in another video. They're just really good. And a lot of people like to leave them running while going down the road. Now, some people say this is illegal everywhere. That's just not true. There are places you can't run propane, so you have to pay attention to it, especially if you're going to be going through tunnels. And definitely when you go to pull in to fuel up for fuel, you don't want to active flame anywhere. That's just safety. But I watched a video years ago from a really good YouTuber, someone I really like. I think he's an expert in the field. He has a big beard. He likes to give tips on Tuesdays. You probably know who I'm talking about. And in that video, he said, don't run your propane refrigerator while traveling. And he gave a couple really good reasons. One of them was the sodium chromite, which is kind of a protectorant in the corals, needs to be level in order to go the right direction, or it starts to build up crystals. So when you're unlevel, it builds up crystals and it can kind of clog that system and make it really hard for your refrigerator to heat, and it eventually goes out. The problem with this is, when I went and looked at the manufacturing recommendations, they said level or in motion. When you're in motion, it does what it needs to make sure it can continue to flow. You don't get the crystals. So that's just not a worry. The other thing he talked about was what can happen with the flame. The flame is in the refrigerator. It basically heats up the percolator, which is inside a tube that basically starts the gas process, that starts the coolant through the tubes. And I'm explaining it horribly, but just remember, you have to have a flame to heat up a tube. And he said when that flame is getting wind, it'll blow and only heat up one side of that tube, and the structural difference between hot and cold can cause that to fail at some point. If it fails, burst open, comes out on the flame, fire, tragedy, we get it. When he said that, I thought about it and I said, that's not my experience when I've been inside these refrigerators. So I went and I pulled the manual for my propane refrigerator at the time, and this was 2021, I believe, and I flipped it open, and sure enough, my manual said it was safe to run down the road. The manual that came with the refrigerator. It was, how in the RV they give you all the manuals. I pulled out the one actually for the refrigerator. It said it was safe to go down the road. Now, I went and double checked another manual more recently, and they gave a more lawyerly answer that we recommend you not, but you can, and take that for what you want. But at that time, it said safe to go down the road. It also mentioned in there, like I said, that while moving, you don't have to worry about the levelness. You do when stopped, but not while moving. But it also had the schematics. And since then, I've looked at the schematics of lots of these 2-way and 3-way refrigerators, the ones that run on propane. And I've also looked at the refrigerators. And they have a chimney with a baffle that the flame sits under. And it basically heats up one side of that tube with the percolator. So what he was worried about with the flame going back and forth and only heating one side, that's what it's designed to do anyway. And the way these are tucked away and that flame is right under the baffle and the chimney, it's not going to get a lot of movement, whether you're sitting at the Badlands and there's lots of wind coming, you're sitting at the Keys, or you're driving down the road. Certainly could be some, but it's not going to hurt anything. If that flame can burn, it's going to be heating up the right spot. And in fact, remember, these fridges can run off of both electricity and gas. And when you look at the diagram, you'll see that the electric element is actually on the other side from where you have your chimney, your flame, and your baffle. So the electric element just sits up against that same percolating tube, the structure outside of it, and heats it up. So whether you're using the electricity, you're using the propane, it's only heating one side or the other of that tub. So that's really not a reason not to use it. Now, he does cite some other things, which he cites National Insurance, maybe Institute, I may have that wrong. But one of the organizations that monitors insurance claims and said that they believe more fires caused by the propane in vehicles, etc. I'll tell you, I went ahead and did a bunch of research looking at a lot of professional organizations, including fire organizations and safeties, etc. And that's not the information I'm finding today. Say more fires are caused by wiring. So, and 12-volt wiring, surprisingly. very little, couldn't really find anything about fires caused because you're traveling with your refrigerator propane on. Can it happen? Maybe. Has it happened? Maybe. But that's not what the data is telling me now. When I look at it, you can look at it yourself. I've definitely looked at it. It does say that in electrical fires, which seems to be the #1 cause, it would be in appliances and in the wiring itself, such as shorts. So the refrigerator could be an appliance, but it's the electrical component, not the propane component. Now, I found this surprising. I really thought the #1 cause of fire would be brakes, because I've seen a lot of fires going down the road with trailers, RV and otherwise, and it's always overheated brakes that I'm seeing. But that's just anecdotal. Now, what I will say is, it does make sense, though, if you have a propane on brake and there is a fire caused by electric or otherwise, that could cause a real problem. And that's why I do recommend you have a gas stop. Gas stop detects those sudden release of pressure and shuts off your propane. Now, am I telling you to drive down the road with your propane on and running your 2-way or 3-way fridge on propane? I'm not. I'm telling you that's a decision you need to make. Check your owner's manual. Read the safety reports from the various professional organizations and come to your own conclusion. Make sure you're following the laws. And if you do have your propane running going down the road, I would definitely be using a gas stop. Now, I'm sure if you call a gas stop, they'd say our #1 recommendation is to turn your gas off while you're going down the road too. So I'm not saying they recommend otherwise. I'm just saying I think it's perfectly safe. I've been doing it my entire life. Most of the RVers I know have been doing it their entire life. And if I didn't have a 12-volt fridge today, if I still had a 2-way or 3, I'd be doing it today. The next travel rule that seems to be a little controversy is people say you should never travel with a full tank of water. And I will tell you, I always travel with a full tank of water. As a matter of fact, my last RV, a Lance 2445, rode so much better with a full tank of water. It kept it from having any kind of sway issues. Matter of fact, if I didn't have a full tank of water, I had to have a ProPride hitch or it would be out of control. Now, I went back and read through manufacturers. I read Winnebago, I read Grand Design, I read Alliance, I read Brinkley, I read some others, and I read all their manuals to see what they say about this. So between those manufacturers, we basically ended up with, and I'll just give you the summary of putting them all together. You can do it. Some said you can do it, but we don't recommend it. Some said you could do it, but you're probably going to lose gas and you need to make sure you're comfortable with your handling. Some said, yeah, just do it. You may pay a little extra in fuel if you do it. Some said, do it if you must, but you could also just put water in when you get there. So it was basically no one said you couldn't do it. Not a single person. And some brands, like this one, didn't seem to have a problem with it at all. And not a single one of them said it was dangerous to drive with the full tank of water. And not a single one of them said that there was a risk of the water tank dropping out, which is what you see online all the time. I'm sure it's happened to someone, or people wouldn't say it. I think I've seen photos of it happening. Now, what I will say is 2 or 3 of the manufacturers did say if you're going to travel often with a full fresh water tank, make sure, and I think I would do this anyway, that you're getting under it once in a while and checking the supports. Make sure everything's good, that it's going to be fine under there. You should be doing that anyway. Now, why do I travel with one? That's why I bought the RV. I mean, I need water to go places. I'm not just going from hookup to hookup. I may hit 3 harvest hosts before I have a hookup. I may pull into the Badlands for a week before I have a hookup. I may, whatever, do a Cracker Barrel stay. The water is there so I can use the RV. That's what the tank is made for. I mean, that's why we have it. Now, what I will say is I do dump my waste tanks as soon as I can. If I have anything in my waste tanks and I come by a fueling station that has a dump station or a rest area that has a dump station, I'll go ahead and dump them, because I do think that water can start to influence how your handling is going, which brings me to the next one. The next point people will say, and it's just the opposite, they'll say you should never travel with a half tank or a small tank of fresh water, that it needs to be completely full or completely empty. And this one actually makes more sense. If you know anything about trucking and driving, you'll know that fuel tanks have baffles in them, so it keeps the water from slashing around. And that one thing that makes driving a milk truck really dangerous is they have no baffle. So you can get that swishing of the water and make those trucks tip over. Well, when you have a fresh water tank on these things, if it's halfway full, that water is going to be swishing side by side and give some of that momentum to your trailer. It can cause sway, it can cause more likely to tip over, those kind of things. If it's empty, you don't have that. If it's completely full, it can't swish as much. So there is some truth in that. But I find where the tanks are on here, and we're talking about most of these tanks are probably under 150 gallons. Most of them are well under 100. I haven't really experienced that problem. I haven't felt the slishing of the water. I feel mine all the way full. But as I use it and I lose water, I really just don't worry about it. Now, the next one is most RVs today, this used to not be the case at all, have a travel mode on your RV. You put it into travel mode so that you're basically only running things that you have to have running. Normally your 12-volt fridge or something like that while you go down the road. And while I just said most fires are started by electrical system, including 12-volt systems, your RV has 12-volt running through it anyway. That's what the lights are that go to the back, etc. But you are making the risk more if you have more stuff on. You may have appliance coming on. But I personally don't think that's a real issue. I think the real reason for that travel mode is to prevent parasitic draw on your batteries, keeping your batteries from going down. So if you don't have a lot of batteries, you don't have a lot of solar in there, you don't have a DC to DC charger, keeping everything good as you drive down the road, then you probably ought to put it in travel mode, but I don't bother. Now that brings up another point. If you travel like I do, and you're thinking, should I pay some money and put some more solar on top or get a DC to DC charger? I highly recommend the DC to DC charger. Also in that line is, should you run down the road with your inverter on? Now, some people have residential refrigerators, and if they want them to stay cool, unless they've put some ice in them or they're just going short distances, they'll probably run down the road with their inverter on. We generally do not run down the road with our inverter on. I think that could also cause some potential fire issues. It could also cause some, that's some pretty live wires as you're going down the road. If you got in a wreck, it could be dangerous for your first responders. But I know most of my friends travel down the road with their inverter on to power one thing or another and have had no problems. And so personally, it's just what you feel like doing. I just never need my inverter while we're driving down the road, so I don't travel with it on. One exception I have to running that inverter while going down the road is if it's really hot and I want to turn on my air conditioner to cool off the camper before we get there, before we stop for a lunch stop, before we get to a campsite, I will remotely turn on that inverter and turn on those air conditioners from the cab of the truck and let it cool off a little bit. And that has made setup so much nicer when you get out and your RV is already cool. And then there's the last propane. Then there's the last propane question. And this is the one where I'm probably going to get a lot of comments. Should you run your furnace while you're going down the road? And I would say normally no, if you can help it. But I have traveled during absolute freezing days where I have turned on my furnace for a little bit of time here and there just to make sure my pipes don't freeze until I can get to another spot. Now, what I tried to do is find a place I can pull over and run it and warm things up for a little bit. Our tanks have heaters on them, 12-volt heaters, so I'm not worried about the tanks. I'm worried about those little pipes. And movement can also help with the tanks. Doesn't help as much with the pipes. So if I've gone for a while and it's really cold and I can't pull over to turn on my furnace, I may run it for a little bit going down the road. I prefer not to. I try not to. But if I think I'm about to freeze up, I'll crank it on for a little bit and then I'll turn it off as soon as I think I can. But I much prefer to pull over at a rest area or something like that. I don't think running your furnace down the road is probably a good idea. But if I'm running that heater, I definitely want to make sure I got the gas stop on, because if I have the propane on while traveling down the road, I want the gas stop. Gives me a little peace of mind. So those are the 5 controversial travel rules that I may not always follow. I'm kind of curious, do you follow those rules? How do you feel about them? I think this probably has changed over time. I think a lot of people who started RVing when I did just always ran their propane with their refrigerators. And I think as time has gone on, people kind of changed. And now we have 12-volt refrigerators. That's mattering less and less every day. Just kind of curious. How do you do it?